Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your sommelier of cinema, your Archduke or Archbishop of Banterbury, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, and of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett. And I am here. Robcasting from the Robservations. I don't know why I do that. At you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, bringing you Robservations episode number 397, ladies and gentlemen. I can't believe it. Now I got an admission to make. There are holes in my pop culture knowledge, pop culture lexicon. I'm not proud of them. They're there, and I've done nothing to alleviate those holes. As a matter of fact, sometimes I have wantonly, deliberately not filled my imagination potholes out of spite. I don't know. I'm not proud. I should be interested in everything. I like everything, mostly, for the most part, or at least I'm interested in everything. But there are just some things that have gotten by me. Things like, Friends, or The Office, or, I'm sorry to say, The Simpsons. The Simpsons, of course, going to be the longest running television show ever, of course. And recently, Matt Groening and team dropped a Simpsons short, a new Simpsons short. It dropped on Disney Plus on April 10th. Here's what they announced, how they announced it. Greetings, friends. This is what Matt Groening put on Instagram. Earlier this year, we made a nifty little short film called Playdate with Destiny. The response was so gratifying, we wanted everyone to see it at home. So here you go, stream it starting April 10th on Disney Plus. Now, Playdate with Destiny was, of course, the short they released theatrically. Disney has had a tradition of putting short films in front of their other releases, Pixar releases, things like that. But now that they own The Simpsons, they put out a Simpsons short, and then it dropped on Disney Plus, which is very exciting. Now, if nothing else, I have to say, I've always said to people, I've never really seen a Simpsons episode. That isn't entirely true, because when The Simpsons first came on the air, and I would have to say, for about the first 5 years, I did watch Simpsons episodes. As a matter of fact, my friend who's no longer with us, one of my very best friends in the world, Sean Fanning, was a huge Simpsons fan. And we would party a lot at his house. He bought a house. He had a house before anybody else I knew. And he watched The Simpsons. We watched The Simpsons. And he would make us watch The Simpsons. And I liked The Simpsons. I didn't dislike The Simpsons. It was not my go-to entertainment of choice. I remember the first time I ever saw a Simpsons episode, and I believe it was in front of War of the Roses, and I don't know if that's true, but I found an article that I'm going to read later that talks about that, but I think it was in front of War of the Roses. I saw it at the Avco Cinemas in Westwood, and I want to say it was before they split the big auditorium up. The auditorium there was still really big. It was a great auditorium, and I believe I first saw... Now, I don't know if this short had aired on the Tracy Ullman show first, but I distinctly remember the short, and the Simpsons were electrocuting each other at a therapist's office. And I think it was called Family Therapy. Now, that was the first Simpsons I ever saw, and I saw it theatrically, and I thought it was hilarious. Now, I grew up in Seattle, and I went to the Evergreen State College, which is Matt Groening's alma mater. He went there as well. And I used to read Life in Hell, which was Matt Groening's precursor comic to The Simpsons, which I thought was hilarious. I loved Life in Hell. I loved Matt Groening's sensibility. Huge fan of all that. So when The Simpsons came on, it was a big deal. I liked it. It had sort of, it represented a little bit of anarchy. And it was the antithesis of what we'd been getting. Let's say The Cosby Show, the antithesis of The Cosby Show, the perfect American family, which was an extension of things I had grown up with all the way back to Leave It to Beaver. This was the opposite of that. And I did like it for that. I liked the fact that Bart Simpson had no respect for any kind of authority at all. And I thought it was funny. Who didn't like The Simpsons when it first debuted? And I started thinking about when was the last time that I watched The Simpsons. And I think that whether I liked The Simpsons or not, or whether I was a fan or not, I mean, I was a fan 25 years ago, but I probably haven't watched Simpsons since the early to mid 90s. And I was thinking about what was the last Simpsons episode I remember watching that I really liked. And all I could remember is that Bart got an elephant in it, like in a radio contest. And I went and looked it up, and sure enough, Bart Gets an Elephant is the name of the episode. And I was thinking, for everything I know, or all of the crazy factoids that I've memorized, or all the experiences I had working in the entertainment business, there are just these things, and I think The Simpsons is one of them that I'm a little embarrassed about, to be honest. I'm embarrassed I don't know enough about The Simpsons, and I should know more. Because The Simpsons, whether you like it or not, The Simpsons is incredibly significant in the annals of entertainment. And it's nothing like that's ever been done before. And now we're going to get, well, they did renew The Simpsons through seasons 31 and 32. But I've come to dislike what I at least perceived from my non-watching. Something that I thought that I first noticed in The Simpsons. And this idea that there is a fundamental lack of respect in our culture that has sort of taken hold that didn't exist in my mind until The Simpsons. And in my mind, I've always blamed Bart Simpson for that. When I was a kid, when I was growing up, we always respected our teachers and the adults in our lives, whether it was my parents' friends, my own parents, or anybody that was an adult. I would never think of talking back to them. I would never think of disrespecting an adult. But I sort of noticed that in the 90s, there began this shift, and I would notice it when I would see programs like anything that was on Nickelodeon, for instance, or whether, Disney Channel, live action shows. You would tune in, and it seemed like the kids knew everything, and the adults were kind of idiots. And that was the antithesis of what I grew up believing and what I grew up experiencing. I mean, I was a kid growing up I was watching shorts, and I was watching like the Hour Gang shorts I saw. And then, of course, you did watch Leave It to Beaver and things like that, and the Partridge Family and the Brady Bunch. I mean, those kinds of sitcoms, the kids, they tried to get away with things, but at the end of the day, the adults always were the ones that they would go to, and they had a lesson imparted to them by the adults. And that sort of, I thought, was removed with Bart Simpson, and everybody wanted to be Bart. And I can understand why. But now, 30 years plus later, I feel like the entire civilization, maybe it's because there's a whole generation that's grown up not respecting teachers. I mean, this idea of even helicopter parenting, the idea that a parent would go and demand they change their children's grade. They'd ask the teacher to change a child's grade. I mean, if I got bad report cards, that was not a good thing. Like, my dad was like, dude, what's up with this? Why are you failing? I never was failing classes, but why are you getting a C-? And it was my fault. It was not anyone else's fault. And my parents, when they looked at you disappointed, you were bummed out. So anyway, I was just thinking about The Simpsons, and I was thinking about that, and I figured, let me do some research. I'm going to delve into just a cursory glance, jumping around the internet, see what I could find out about The Simpsons. And there's been, first of all, so much written about The Simpsons. They're just, I don't even know where to begin. So I figured I'd just take a gander and see what I'd come up with. And I figured I'd share those things with you today. And the first thing that I came up with was an article. It was actually a blog post from Sean Munger, from SeanMunger.com. And this was written a number of years ago. And the headline is Unthinkable and Un-American. Yes, I am not a fan of The Simpsons. Let me read it to you. I'm told that there was some sort of mega Simpsons marathon on TV yesterday. I'm told rather than I know for sure because I don't watch a lot of TV. And in any event, I'm spending most of my time in a research library coming up with awesome stuff like this for your amusement and my dissertation. I won't click on the link. Yesterday morning, I had a good-natured, light-hearted spar session with one of my Twitter buddies. He happens to be the author of a couple of great books on Slayer, where he chided me for not spending the entire day watching Simpsons episodes. At the heart of this jocular spat is a terrible truth. I'm not really a very big fan of The Simpsons. I know that's un-American, if not completely unimaginable, but it's true. In my life, I think I've seen maybe 5 or 6 episodes of the show, and they didn't impress me. It is absolutely astonishing to me to behold that The Simpsons has been running continuously on American television for nearly 25 years. I guess that puts this article 6 years ago. I certainly remember when it debuted, and most of the 5 or 6 episodes I saw when I was in college at what I guess was the series' heyday in the early 90s. Again, I look back at that sentence and I'm amazed. This show was in its heyday when I was an undergrad in college and it's still on the air. How this happened utterly baffles me. Don't get me wrong, I don't deny or malign the impact that The Simpsons has had on American popular culture in the past quarter century. There's no question that it's an important show in the history of television and most likely a significant piece of art in its own right. Matt Groening, who created the show, is justifiably hailed as being brilliant. Bart Simpson is the Charlie Brown of the post-Cold War era, and Homer's trademark "Dope" is now indelibly part of English language. I get all that. It's just that, for all of this, The Simpsons never engaged me on an emotional, intellectual, or artistic level. To me, it's a cartoon sitcom. There, I said it. Believe it or not, there are such people who think that, yes, and I am one of them. My first encounter with The Simpsons was not on TV, but in a movie theater. Shortly before the show debuted on Fox in December of 1989, Matt Groening and the producers sought to drum up buzz by releasing a few Simpsons cartoon shorts to run before some big-name movies out that fall. One of them was The War of the Roses, starring Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner, a highly underrated film in my opinion. A Simpsons short ran before that movie. It was funny, and I remember thinking, wow, that's great. If we're rebooting the old days of cartoon shorts before movies, as was the custom from the 30s to the late 50s, that's pretty cool. Better than endless previews of superhero movies, which we all seem to see these days. By the way, I don't feel the same way that Sean Mungard feels about superhero movie trailers, but okay. But alas, no such plans were afoot. The short was merely meant to promote the series. The only show I watched at that time was Star Trek The Next Generation, and I wasn't enthused enough about the short to change my viewing habits so as to stay home Sunday nights watching a cartoon sitcom. I think the initial power of The Simpsons, aside from the iconic art style of Matt Groening, came from the time in which it premiered, and specifically how the American family was being depicted on TV at that time. The period 1989 to 90 was the heyday of what some television historians have called the anti-family sitcom, which, instead of depicting an idyllic middle America dream of what family should be, which had been the blueprint of family shows since the 1957 debut of Leave It to Beaver, showed families more like they really are, riven by conflict, often with wisecracking, misbehaving kids, marital strife, and the various maddening details of modern life left in rather than excluded. Shows like Roseanne and The Simpsons were the vanguard of this movement. Clearly, there would have been no Simpsons without the 1980s mega hit The Cosby Show, which was simply a modern redress of Beaver-like perfect family shows advanced forward in time 30 years. Indeed, I don't think you can understand The Simpsons without understanding The Cosby Show, which was its direct progenitor. The gestalt of The Simpsons, in a way, is simply a reaction, not action. But where have all the perfect families gone since the 1980s? Perfect Family shows gone since the 1980s. As I said, I don't watch much TV, but I certainly don't hear about squeaky clean family shows burning up the airwaves the way one did 25 or 30 years ago. Nowadays, family sitcoms are almost always wisecracking and satirical rather than milquetoast and sanitized. The Bundys, Family Guy, American Dad, these are all the families that have been on TV since 1989, and they're stamped from the mold of The Simpsons, not Beaver or the Cosbys. In this sense, you can see the cultural impact The Simpsons has had. I think the perfect family show is dead as a genre, except perhaps in some fringe niche market. The Cleavers, Bradys, and Huxtables of the TV universe are now as archaic as bell-bottoms and Macaha beads. Bart Simpsons drove a stake through their hearts. Maybe it is for this that The Simpsons deserves to be lionized. That still doesn't make me a fan, though, and maybe after 25 years it's time to move on to another trope, to reinvent TV in some new creative rather than reactive direction. That's just my uninformed, unpopular opinion. Homer, Bart, and Lisa have been clowning every Sunday night since the first George Bush was in the White House. Maybe it's time for them to make their entry into rerun syndication Valhalla. Or maybe that's just blasphemy. You be the judge. That was posted by Sean Munger on August 24th, 2014, and it's on his blog, seanmunger.com. So I can't tell you if it's still there anymore, but that's where I found it, and I want to thank him for writing it so I could pilfer it for this show. So thank you, Sean, but I want to make sure you have full credit and you were able to get maybe more viewers or clicks or whatever from the people watching the show. The next thing that I wanted to share with you was this Vulture article, because the Vulture article looked back at what people were saying when The Simpsons first began airing, which I thought was interesting. And this is by Sean Fitzgerald. It is from Vulture, and it was published, again, on September 26, 2014. So I figured I would celebrate for its 25th anniversary. This was written for its 25th anniversary. They went back and they looked at certain things that were said about the show. Los Angeles Times, December 16th, 1989. TV reviews, The Simpsons get a show of their own for Christmas. They said, they're a bickering family of 5 lovable mutants with yellow skin, golf ball eyes, and absolutely no resemblance to the Brady Bunch. Weird, but wonderful. From the Chicago Tribune, December 17th, 1989. Sam Kinison drops into a Noel-fashion nightmare at the Bundy household. What the Bundys are to the Cleavers, the Simpsons are to Charlie Brown's brood. This cartoon family, the creation of Matt Groening, is a bizarrely bug-eyed bunch and far more wicked, funny, and sophisticated than what we have come to expect from cartoons. Newsweek, December 25th, 1989, says, and you thought Roseanne was a departure from the sitcom norm. Wild, acerbic, and sometimes deeply cynical, The Simpsons is hardly the stuff of Saturday morning children's programming. Its fans, like those of Fox's other shows, will probably include the young, hip viewers who have emerged as Fox's target audience. And those who go for the show will doubtless go for The Simpsons merchandise, which includes t-shirts, sleepwear, and even a Bart talking doll. The only thing they wouldn't let me do is have the doll belch, says Groening with a sly smile. But the Bart doll does get to say, the kids in TV land are being duped. It's that irreverence that makes The Simpsons such a promising addition to prime time. USA Today said on January 12th, 1990, what's amazing about the show, an existential riot on the terrors of home, work, and school, isn't that the sardonic wit that left us wanting more on The Ullman Show can sustain laughs for a full half hour. The surprise is how oddly touching The Simpsons can be, especially in the relationship between put-upon father Homer and bad boy Bart. The Simpsons is crammed with sly visual and verbal gags. It's adult entertainment that's just as hip for kids. Being a cartoon just makes it that much more exciting and unpredictable. From my hometown Seattle Times on January 13th, 1990. The Simpsons, Homer and Marge and their 3 children, Bart, Lisa, and baby Maggie, can best be described as a cartoon version of family life as depicted by the live actors in Roseanne and Married with Children. With their garish cartoon colors and outrageous points of view, they're definitely a family for the 90s. People magazine said on February 12, 1990, as far as animation goes, Groening's style clearly owes more to underground cartoonist R. Crumb than it does to Hanna-Barbera. In The Simpsons' grotesque family unit, Cro-Magnon Dad works at a nuclear power plant. Mom has a blue Bride of Frankenstein hairdo. Their 3 offspring are exactly the sort of low-slung predators people who hate children dread most. Watching the antics of these inveterate losers is seriously skewed and seriously funny. New York Times said, the show can fall flat. Last Sunday's episode about a family camping trip started off promisingly as a slick car dealer spotted the rube-like Simpsons approaching his camper display and murmured in fervent gratitude, "Thank you, God." But the trip itself soon became merely outlandish, with Homer covered in pond slime and being mistaken for Bigfoot. There is, admittedly, a fine line between being hilarious, perceptive, and just plain, even objectionably silly. While habitually teetering on that line, The Simpsons has shown a remarkable ability to come down on the right side most of the time. And from the Los Angeles Times Magazine, April 29th, 1990, no wonder, given the energy and unflagging inventiveness of this series, that The Simpsons has flashed through the culture at warp speed. 4 months on the tube, and American kids are trading Bart-isms in their classrooms on Monday morning, while American parents are seeing, sometimes uneasily, their own families reflected in the show's funhouse mirror. "It's life," says one fan, Santa Monica mail carrier Bob Eisenhart. "It's the truth. Plenty of times I'll call my own son Bart for doing some boneheaded thing." Another fan, a checker named Donna at Trader Joe's in West Los Angeles, says she was absolutely shocked by Marge's flirtation with infidelity. "And my boyfriend was shocked too. He said, if Marge can do it, anyone can. After that, I won't let my 6-year-old watch the show, even though it's his favorite." And this goes on and on and on. I mean, clearly, and I remember, and anybody who was around remembers, The Simpsons hit American culture like a nuclear bomb. I mean, everybody watched The Simpsons. Everybody talked about The Simpsons. Bart Simpson, I'm sure, not having kids myself, but even at the time, I was 30 years younger. Even I thought Bart Simpson was a pretty cool badass. And you know what? It's interesting to see where we have come since then. So, again, I was fascinated, and I wanted to look into, like, the long-term effects. There has to be long-term effects. I mean, at the time, The Simpsons were such a cultural phenom. I mean, it was everywhere all the time. And, you know, Bart Simpson was considered a hero, I think, to many young people growing up. And obviously, the respect that you'd think most, at least in my mind, like, I still, for me personally, I still can't call my friends' parents anything other than Mr. or Mrs., even though most of them are in their 80s now. I just can't do it. It was instilled. I can't call my friend Jennifer's parents, who I've known my whole life, Barbara and Steve. I can't do it. I guess they are Barbara and Steve, and maybe it sounds ridiculous. I mean, I do it, but whenever I see them, I feel kind of weird about it. I'm like, all right, I'll call them Barbara and Steve, but I'm not comfortable doing it. So anyway, then I found this interesting article. This was from December 12th, 2019. Alethea Brown wrote it, and this was on medium.com. And this was kind of the thing that I went looking for this kind of thing, and this is one of the first things that I came across. And this article is, "I now know why my mom hated The Simpsons." The Simpsons was one of mine. The way it didn't sugarcoat shit, the way it poked fun of wacky religious people, the honest reality of being a kid on the playground versus what grown-ups told you. Let's be real. Every kid alive knew those cheesy videos on what you had to say to a bully didn't work. At least, they didn't in the 90s. That show brought me a sense of comfort through humor each week. My mom never has and never will be an uptight woman. She's a therapist. She's worked with rich kids with an infinite access to drugs. She's worked as a school counselor in inner-city Oakland elementary schools. Her experience is diverse, and she's not the kind to play at being a Mary Sunshine when she feels the situation calls for more a negative Nancy. My sisters and I were never shielded from things most white kids probably weren't told about, because she was an early proponent of wokeness before it was even called that. Learning more about white privilege as an adult caused some initial confusion, but I can thank my mom for giving me the foundation to be able to explore complex race topics without the typical white knee-jerk reaction. But when we were kids, she hated The Simpsons. Hated. We weren't allowed to watch it. Spoiler alert, we watch it anyway. We'd never been told we couldn't watch something before. I mean, I'm still traumatized from scenes from Beloved. As a single mom, though, she had the "because I said so" dad line down like nobody's business. I used to wish we could convince her The Simpsons was great by sharing with her some single episodes. I could show her how I aligned with Lisa's intelligence and her unapologetic bullshit calling skills, how adorable the noises Maggie made were, how hilarious Homer and Bart were if you looked past the gritty surface, And then there were other non-offensive characters like Marge, who was the background noise, a necessary component of the family dynamic. We didn't, because that would serve as a confession that we were watching it behind Mom's back. I didn't really get why she had objections, but I figured then it had something to do with Homer's drunkenness. Fast forward, and my kids have never had cable in their household. We've had Netflix and movies. At first, it was because we were always swinging along the pendulum between dirt broke and doing okay, but then it became a preferred medium for shows without commercials and new toy ads shoved down their throats. Until Disney Plus came along, I hadn't seen The Simpsons since I was still living in my childhood home. I wasn't even sure if it had been off the air or not. So we started watching like crazy. But then something unexpected happened. An unusual unease set in. There is a reason genre fiction works well when the protagonist is relatable to the target audience, while middle-grade novels showcase a middle-grade main character. The unease had surfaced for me because for the first time, I was relating to Marge, and it made me cringe. Marge is the epitome of a housewife with no other financial options, whose unplanned pregnancy set her on a course we audience members wonder if she would have taken otherwise. When I was a kid, I never noticed that Homer stayed at the bar until 11 p.m. every night, leaving her alone to parent. I never noticed how she picked herself up from disappointment after disappointment, forgiving a man who only half-heartedly attempted to consider her feelings. He seemed to flirt with the temptation of other women, even though Marge was far out of his league. She couldn't confide in him, and he wasn't someone she could count on. I found myself watching and thinking, leave his ass, Marge. Granted, it's a comedy. The writers, mostly men, are self-deprecating with their representation of male stupidity and inconsideration, but when the laughter has died, there lies the truth. Many women can relate to Marge's story of lacking a trustworthy partner in the person you chose to be a partner. Maybe that's why my divorced mother found it too painful to watch, even as a laugh. In all honesty, the unease has gone away, and I've rediscovered that old comfort. I still love The Simpsons, because you reserve more forgiveness for the shows you once cherished as a kid. Plus, it's funny. But I can see how an adult woman who didn't grow up loving the other characters before relating to Marge wouldn't take a shine to the show. Now again, these are not huge, these articles I found, I specifically shied away from major publications. I wanted to, more delve into what I tried to look for an experience of what people were doing. And admittedly, I didn't spend a lot of time looking for these. It was just a cursory glance at the internet, but I thought it was very interesting, especially considering I don't have any kind of personal association with The Simpsons, other than the fact my friend Sean really liked it. I remember seeing it before it was on the air in the movie theaters. I really liked it. And over the first 5 seasons or so, I would watch Simpsons episodes because my friend Sean did, and I would watch them at his house. I might have tuned in a few times on my own, and Bart Gets an Elephant, that episode was the one that I certainly remember the most. But yeah, there's one last article that I wanted to read that I also found, and this, interestingly enough, came from Inverse.com, and it was published on September 26th, 2016, and it was written by Dan Ozzi, I believe is how you pronounce his name, Dan Ozzi. Thought this was also very sort of interesting. The Simpsons taught a generation about censorship. There were 2 kinds of kids in the early 90s, those who could watch and those who couldn't. When in 1990, People magazine asked Barbara Bush what she thought of America's hottest new TV show, The Simpsons, the then First Lady didn't mince her words. It was the dumbest thing I'd ever seen. Her husband, George W. Bush, expressed a similar disdain for the show in a speech to the National Religious Broadcasters Convention during his failed 1992 re-election campaign. He famously promised a cheering crowd that he would work to make the American family, quote, a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons. Following the Bush family's lead, many parents across America banned the show. The novelty of The Simpsons had them shaken. It wasn't the Flintstones, it wasn't the Smurfs, it wasn't kid-friendly in a traditional sense at all. It was a brutally honest take on the traditional nuclear family in the post-Reagan years, starring a spiky-haired, detention-prone D student who swore and lied and decapitated town statues. Naturally, Bart Simpson became the most popular character on Simpsons merchandise, which, according to the Times magazine, accounted for $2 billion in worldwide sales in the show's first 14 months alone. $2 billion in merchandising. That's staggering. Some schools began prohibiting the shirts, and a few stores stopped carrying them. The Los Angeles Times reported in 1990 that JCPenney's yanked a shirt that read, "Underachiever and proud of it, man," and another bearing the words, "Hi, I'm Bart Simpsons. Who the hell are you?" and from its boys and men's departments. I remember these shirts, man. If you weren't there, I understand, but those of us who were, The Simpsons were everywhere. Time would prove the show's worth. On Sunday, The Simpsons began its 28th season, one of the longest runs in TV history. Countless A-list celebrities have legitimized the show by voicing characters including 3 Beatles, a British Prime Minister, and Michael Jackson. It has often been listed among the most important shows of all time, rich with commentary on society and the human condition, which helped to cement its place as an iconic piece of Americana. But for a young generation of TV viewers in the early 90s, the hysteria around the early seasons had a lasting impact. Many people now in their 20s and 30s were forbidden from watching the show in their youth. They grew up aware of, but without access to, a major cultural institution. Quote, "My mother thought Bart was disrespectful to his parents, and she didn't want that type of behavior normalized for me," says Janelle Mullanes, 31, a teacher raised in Miami, Florida. When she heard him say, "Eat my shorts" to Homer, it was all over. Though Mullanes can appreciate the show now as an adult, she didn't have the same ingrained passion for it as her husband, a Simpsons obsessive, who, full disclosure, co-hosts a 90s Simpsons trivia night with me. "I can understand why it's so well regarded, but I'll never love it in the same way as people who grew up with it," she says. "I enjoy and appreciate the occasional episode, but I think nostalgia plays a big role in people's obsession as well. But the show's importance is not simply insular. Many of its jokes and quotes seeped out of its Springfield universe and became part of the American lexicon, quite literally as Homer's trademark catchphrase, "Dope," a creation of voice actor Dan Castellaneta, was added to the Oxford English Dictionary in 2001. The show created a language that permeated the vernacular. Being among fans when they're quoting the show ad nauseum can feel like being among people speaking a different language. Even beyond the jokes I knew were Simpsons references but didn't completely get, I had no idea to the extent to which the show has made an impact on American humor and pop culture, says Allison Hussey, 24, who grew up in Cary, North Carolina and wasn't allowed to watch the show as a kid because it was rude. Her introduction to The Simpsons came in college as required viewing of the episode 2 Cars in Every Garage and 3 Eyes on Every Fish for a political science class. She found it wonderful and has since been watching the show. Currently, she's on season 7. Hussey is amazed by how much cultural minutia was crammed into the episodes. After all, growing up without The Simpsons is not the same as not having seen Star Wars or Seinfeld. The Simpsons is an expansive amalgamation of references from film, television, history, politics, and literature that advance the pop culture knowledge of young viewers beyond their years. With its subtle homages, the show introduced 90s kids to things they would otherwise have had no business knowing about so early. Stanley Kubrick movies, Steve Allen books, the clumsiness of Gerald Ford, Billy Beer, and the works of Pablo Neruda. For a nation of kids raised by the TV's warming glow, The Simpsons wasn't just entertainment. It was an education. Even if I'd watched it as a kid, I would have missed a lot of the stuff that has endeared me to the show as an adult. Viewer nods to things like 2001: A Space Odyssey and Australian Amphibian Infestation, says Hussey. All of those sly little winks in the writing have been fun to keep up with. Not only were its references a valuable historical education, the show was also instrumental in forming the sense of humor for millions of burgeoning minds. Edgar Diaz Machado, a 29-year-old who grew up near Chicago, wasn't allowed to watch the show, along with Married with Children and Roseanne, for religious reasons. He had to sneak episodes in his bedroom with the door closed and a remote in hand in case his parents came in. "My parents are Jehovah's Witnesses," he says. "Jehovah's Witnesses are really strict about entertainment and the negative, immoral influence it can have. My parents realized the humor on The Simpsons was subversive. As a result, Machado missed out on an education in subversive comedy." Seth Finkelstein, a 23-year-old from Marblehead, Massachusetts, whose parents disapproved of the show, believes his sense of humor suffered as a result of missing the show as well. I think I missed an opportunity to understand irony a little bit more than I did as a kid. In its second season, The Simpsons writers made a nod to the subject of cartoons feeling the wrath of angry parental mobs with the episode Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, in which Marge organizes the parents of Springfield to protest Bart and Lisa's favorite show because of its gratuitous violence. They also got back at the Bush family in season 1996 with Two Bad Neighbors, wherein Barbara and George H.W. Bush moved to Springfield because it was the town with the lowest voter turnout in America. Eventually, The Simpsons was superseded as an object of parental scorn by cartoons that were legitimately crass, starting when Beavis and Butthead played frog baseball in 1993 and continued under South Park's relentless shock fest that began in 1997. It's been nearly 26 years since First Lady Barbara Bush put a stain on the reputation of America's favorite cartoon family. The generation of kids who felt its effects are now old enough to have children of their own. Rusty Harding, 32, who was banned from watching the show along with partaking in PG-13 movies, video games, and most Fox programming, recently became a father himself and thinks a lot about how his mother's parenting decision affected him. I think that I really missed out on that moment. The Simpsons ruled pop culture. It was kind of a struggle fitting in with other kids when that dominates the playground, he says of his childhood ban. It led him to become fanatical about the show in his adult years. Harding doesn't plan on passing this down to his 15-month-old son, who he has recently begun indoctrinating with The Simpsons. He loves it. The colors, the sounds, everything about the show makes him giggle. There won't be a part of his life where The Simpsons doesn't exist, and he'll be free to watch it in our house anytime. And again, that I just read, that came from Inverse, and it was written by Dan Ozzie, and it was published September 26, 2016. So clearly, I have a lot to learn about The Simpsons, and reading these articles really made me appreciate and respect the great, obviously, it's one of the great entertainment success stories, and I used to love to tell people, yes, before I went to USC, I went to the Evergreen State College where Linda Barry and Matt Groening went. So, I've tried to dine out on the fact that I went to the same college as Matt Groening did, knowing full well how, $2 billion in merchandise in the first, 15 months or whatever I read. That's incredible. What a success story. I can't even imagine how much money that show has generated. Certainly, it has to be one of the most lucrative entertainment properties of all time. Yes, probably still exceeding the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Star Wars. But it's incredible, and I thought it was time for me to take just a brief look back at The Simpsons on this show. I don't know what you guys think of The Simpsons, but I really wanted to do that. This is the time now that I wanted to remind you that this weekend I will be appearing on the online Mainframe Comic-Con. It's live and online, April 25th through 26th. And on Saturday at 12:30 noon, I will be moderating a discussion with Andy Park, Designing the MCU, a conversation with Andy Park, the Director of Visual Development at Marvel Studios. I am very much looking forward to this conversation. Everyone knows I've been calling Kevin Feige himself my Lord and Savior, or the Lord and Savior of the comic book movie, for a long time now. I am a huge fan of the design of the MCU. One of the reasons I love Hot Toys so much is because of all of the MCU characters that I have. So tune in. That'll be 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and that will be, once again, at the Mainframe Comic-Con, live and online. I'll tell you more about who I'm going to be interviewing and moderating discussions with on Sunday, tomorrow. So there you go. Come on and, as the Evil Dead would say, join us. But anyway, what do you guys have to say? What's going on with you? I got some good letters today, as I always do. You guys have not let me down. Not let me down. So I want to thank you for that, which is very exciting, very exciting. The Joker sends in a tip and says, Rob, I've instructed Bane and his syndicate to start making masks for the citizens of Gotham. We'll save Gotham from the virus pandemic, while you and Batman will be reviled for only making masks for yourselves. I'll rebrand this as the Batman virus. Aha! Actually, Joker said Robin. I didn't realize the joke he was making, but yes. Well, Joker, if you and Bane are making masks, well, I think that you'll probably succeed in whatever nefarious plans you have up your sleeve. So, more power to you. More power to you. Willow sends in a tip, and she asks, is it true that the character of Ellen Ripley was initially intended to be a man named Martin Roby? Do you think a man would have worked as well in the role? Willow is, of course, asking about Alien. And, of course, Warrant Officer Ripley, who is the last surviving member of the Nostromo. And she's not signing off because I looked that up. I want to find out. I knew that was true, but I wondered if there was more to it than that. So I found on the Strange Shapes Alien series, that's on WordPress.com. It's alienseries.wordpress.com. This was posted on November 28th, 2012. And let's see, I don't know who wrote it, but it begins with a quote from Sigourney Weaver from Empire magazine in 2009. She came from a family of flyers, people in this business, a space family rather than an army family. Nothing phases her, and if it does, you'd never know it. Ripley was pretty inexperienced. This was the biggest job she'd had. She was by the book because of the inexperience, and in the course of the story, she has to go from earnest infant to full-on survival mode, like an animal. That's what Sigourney Weaver told Empire magazine in 2009. Dan O'Bannon's Alien script featured an all-male crew of 6 with one important disclaimer. The crew is unisex, it reads, and all parts are interchangeable for men or women. The character that would become Warrant Officer Ripley was first known as Martin Roby. Roby is the ship's executive officer and is described in the script as being cautious but intelligent, a survivor, which shows no real marked difference from the Ripley we know. Many of his scenes are carried over to the final movie. He refuses to allow the others back on board when they return from the pyramid silo instead of the alien derelict. In the movie, it's an alien derelict ship. In the script, it was a pyramid. Is suspicious of the facehugger's prolonged presence on the ship, even when his crewmates have relaxed somewhat after leaving the planetoid, and he ultimately takes the lead and survives the alien's onslaught along with the ship's cat. Having pretty women as the main character was a real cliche of horror movies, Dan O'Bannon told Cult People, and I wanted to stay away from that, so I made up the character of Ripley, who I didn't know was going to be a woman at the time. I sent the people of the studio some notations of what I thought should happen, and when we were about to make the movie, the producer, Walter Hill, of the film jumped on. He just liked the idea and told me we should make that Ripley character a woman. I thought that the captain would have been an old woman and the Ripley character a young man. That would have been interesting, but he said, no, let's make the hero a woman. O'Bannon wasn't the only one to have some slight reservations about making the lead character a female. Producer David Giler also thought that having Captain Dallas as the female on board would be interesting. But Hill was adamant. He told Film International that, quote, David had suggested making the captain a woman. I tried that, but I thought the money was on making the ultimate survivor a woman. The change from O'Bannon's Roby to the film's Ripley, named after Believe It or Not, revealed Hill, was not immediate. Alien, as we know it, did not spring forth fully formed like Athena, but was instead the product of writing and rewriting, giving and taking, cutting and recutting over a period of a couple of years. In fact, the final revised script, which you can read online, was not the shooting draft, but was cobbled together in December 1978 after principal photography had concluded. Though Giler and Hill rewrote Dan O'Bannon's script after snapping it up, 20th Century Fox did not greenlight a version of Alien where the lead was female. In fact, the character was still a male even when Ridley Scott came on board in 1978. A couple of weeks at Fox, said Scott, they said, we're ruminating on the idea of making Ripley a woman. Scott's involvement in the decision-making process here was minimal. I just said, that's a good idea. Later, he was far more blunt on the topic of Ripley's gender and her prominent role in the film. My film has strong women simply because I like strong women, he said. It's a personal choice. I'm no male chauvinist, nor do I understand female chauvinism. I just believe in the equality of men and women. Simple as that. So there you go, Willow. Thank you for asking about that, because I thought that was pretty damn interesting, and it makes me look harder, which is what this show is all about, right? So thank you for that. Jason S. sends in a tip and says, I think The Simpsons peaked with the whole Who Shot Mr. Burns in the mid-90s. Bartman and House of Horrors were my favorite episodes. I love the Treehouse of Terror, by the way. I tuned out when they turned every episode into a celebrity guest star and made every episode around the celebrity. Evan Newman sends in a tip and says, outside of driving new subscribers, I do not understand why The Simpsons is on Disney+. It seems completely off-brand for the service, especially when Disney is editing its own past content like Splash to be family-friendly. Simpsons should be on Hulu. You know, I found that pretty interesting, Evan, myself. I'm like, really? All right, you're going to put that on Disney+. It seems like the antithesis of what they're going for, and yet they put CGI hair on Daryl Hannah's beautiful bare buttocks just because she's a mermaid, and they don't want kids to see what? Someone's backside? What's wrong with a bare ass? I honestly don't know. Do It for Cash sends in a tip and says, Rob, check out the legendary drummer of The Roots, Questlove's YouTube channel. He's been doing hours-long Prince mixes for the past few days. What? Everyone, today is the 4th anniversary of the death of Prince. That must be why Questlove is doing that. I have nothing but respect for Questlove. He is a ultimate, I mean, that guy's a record nerd. He's a music encyclopedia. I love him, and obviously The Roots is one hell of a band. So I will definitely check that out. I didn't know he's doing that. I can't even imagine what Questlove Prince remixes are like. I'm going to have to maybe rip that shit off YouTube and put it in my playlists or burn a CD of it, because you know me, I love my physical media no matter what it is. Bob Kowal says, young people are high-minded because they have not yet been humbled by life, nor have they experienced the fourth. Let me start that again, Bob. Young people are high-minded because they have not yet been humbled by life, nor have they experienced the force of circumstances. They think they know everything and are always quite sure about it. Aristotle, 400-ish BC. Bart's tude is nothing new. Oh, Bob, what a great quote. Aristotelian quotes about Bart Simpson. That's what Robservations is all about, and I want to thank you for that. Roberto Suarez, our man Roberto's here. Where have you been, Roberto? Sorry I haven't been able to tune in recently. I've missed you and the Post-Geek Singularity in the last few weeks. I just finished my latest video contribution for your 400th episode, hoping it's to your liking. Well, Roberto, I've loved your videos. I put your last one up about ElfQuest as a single standalone video, which I'm probably going to do with everybody's videos. I want to thank you, my friend, for sending in a video. I can't wait to play it for the 400th episode of the show coming up on Friday. It's a Kangaroo sends in a tip and says, will humanity's future timeline happen in this order? One world race, genetic manipulation, transhumanism, a united Earth, colonization of the solar system, AI, interstellar travel, and finally the singularity. Ooh, that's, I like these simple, softball questions there. It's Kangaroo. I don't know. I have a tendency to think all of this stuff is going to be happening at the same time. I wish it were like an easy timeline to follow, but I think we're in the middle of all of these things. We're in the beginning stages of a one-world race. We're in the beginning stages of genetic manipulation, transhumanism, a united Earth, colonization of the solar system, AI, interstellar travel, and finally the singularity. I mean, let's face it, we're going to be able to launch astronauts from American soil back to the ISS next month. It's all happening at the same time. The future is heading at us, barreling at us, and that's why I think, we need clear thinkers. We need scientists. We need ethicists. We need people that really understand what the human race is going to face in the next 100 years. And I for one, am excited. As an eternal optimist, I think, hey, read Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens. The real question, I keep going back to this. We as a race, and when I say race, I mean the human race, the global race of humans on this planet. We are one race. We might have differences, Obviously, if you came from places where there's more sun than others, you're going to look a little different over the years, over the centuries. But we're all still part of the human race. All of us can procreate with one another, and we should. But, we should move forward, but we have to ask ourselves, as what Yuval Harari says at the end of the book, Sapiens, he asks us that as a race, we need to understand, or we need to ask the question, what is it we want? What does the human race want going forward? I don't know if we have that answer. Anyway, Jamie Cruz sends in a tip and says, have you seen the Kickstarter In Search of Tomorrow, an 80s sci-fi documentary? I have not, but I have not seen that. I guess it's a Kickstarter. the thing is, I lived through all that. I mean, they should be interviewing me. but I'll definitely look upon that. I mean, that sounds great. It sounds like a great Kickstarter project. Alexander Wilson is here and sends in a tip and says, watching wrestling in the 90s was all about disrespect. Stone Cold said, F authority and drink beer. The Rock disrespected everybody, even the old lady in the first row. And the NWO said, screw tradition, create your own tradition. It was everywhere. Yeah, no, I agree. I really do believe that there was a culture of disrespect. And for kids, as these articles said, that Bart Simpson represented that as well, that somehow by disrespecting someone else, you gain some kind of power. And I think that was something that we're dealing with the ramifications of that even now. And look, I'm not some, as you all know, I'm no fuddy-duddy. I mean, I talk about getting penetrated by the prehensile tails of alien beings. So and liking it. So I'm all about all that kind of stuff. But I do think that, one of the things that I say, one of the things that this channel is all about, what I always end with is every person you meet has a story to tell. And I think inherent to that idea is that you should respect other people unless they do something to where you don't have to respect them anymore. But I would like to live in a world, I would prefer to live in a world where everybody just presupposes respect for their fellow human beings. Maybe that's a pipe dream. Oh, Claudius is here with a four-parter. Bonjour, Monsieur Robert. Excellent topic. Our social divergence can be traced back to anomalies during the 1980s. Let me begin by saying that I think The Simpsons have provided a helpful social commentary on the American experience. The Simpsons, are they un-American? Specifically, does it encourage us to be our best, or does it make us more comfortable with mediocrity? In my humble opinion, Simpsons at its critical best was a social parody of the American family, specifically that father. Homer is the well-meaning guy who never grew up, never learned to think critically. He lacked typical 80s Wall Street discipline and drive. It was a sitcom, a more realistic family that was broadcast in opposition to The Cosby Show. The Cosby Show was also a reaction to the depiction of African Americans in popular culture. Cosby was refreshing and more actually realistic. This may be a surprise to some. Statistically, most black families are free of incarceration and poverty. That was my experience too growing up, Claudius. Claude, I didn't see that many African American families were incarcerated or stricken by poverty where I'm from. I come from Seattle. I mean, it was not a mistake that our hardest rapper was Mix-a-Lot, who sang about his cars, titties on the glass, and big butts. And now we have Macklemore. And I love both of them for it. Sean Wolf sends in a tip and says, The Simpsons is part of a long campaign for the demise of the family itself. This began with the Bachelor Dad shows of the 60s and 70s. The 80s and 90s attack shifted its focus on the stereotypical idiot father. That's interesting. All right, Sean, I'll bite. The Simpsons is part of a long campaign for the demise of the family itself. Whose campaign? And I don't know. I mean that with no disrespect. I'm genuinely curious if this is something that has been planned over this long. Who is playing this long game, and why? What is their end game going to be? I think it's a very interesting thing that you're positing here, but I don't know what that means. It's very interesting. Very, very interesting. Let me jump into some letters, some of your letters, by God, which is exciting. Let's see here. I've got letters for Tuesday. I've been whipping through these letters. I can't thank you for all of them. It's great. I think I'll start with a letter from our man Ian Samuels, who was gone for a while, but now he's back. Rob and fellow Robservationists, I would like to discuss writer and director James Cameron. Cameron is one of the most successful directors in Hollywood, but does he deserve his success? Well, let's take a look at his track record. In 1984, we got Terminator. Terminator became one of the biggest films of the year, if not the decade. But where did the idea come from? Well, some similarities have been suggested between Cameron's Terminator and Harlan Ellison's 1957 story, Soldier from Tomorrow, which was later filmed and became a 1964 Outer Limits episode, Soldier. In 1986, we got the Alien sequel, Aliens. Where did Cameron get that idea for that movie? Again, there has been questions over its originality, as it's very similar to the 1981 low-budget Galaxy of Terror, which I should point out Cameron did work on. He was working on visual effects for Galaxy of Terror. Then we must consider two of the biggest movies of all time, Titanic and Avatar. The love story in Titanic has been suggested as basically a ripoff of the 1980 time travel story Somewhere in Time, which would explain the time traveler theory about Leonardo DiCaprio's character Jack. As for Avatar, it is an expensive experiment in 3D filmmaking, but its plot has been said to be many a poor imitation of 1992's Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest. So based on this, admittedly circumstantial evidence, is Cameron one of the top directors in Hollywood or one of the most successful rip-off merchants in Hollywood? Unfortunately, I tend to side from the second one. What's your opinion? Well, first of all, I think that there are storytelling tropes. I mean, you could say Fern Gully was the Pocahontas story, and that's where Avatar was inspired from. And those stories about an advanced culture and a character from an advanced culture meeting someone from an indigenous population, that story is as old as time, really. So I don't necessarily, I wouldn't point to stories like Fern Gully and say, oh, he was ripping that off, because I don't think that's true. I think he's going back a lot further than that. And also, James Cameron, it's not just about his stories, it's about his technique and his directing ability. If it were so easy to adapt any story, every movie would be amazing. James Cameron, much like Steven Spielberg, is a man that really knows how to manipulate an image and how those images cut together to create cinema. And there are few filmmakers, I would say, in the world that have ever existed that know how to make action movies the way Cameron does. Also, Cameron comes from a background, he's an artist, he's a visual artist. He also knows his visual effects. He can run a camera himself if he needs to. James Cameron can do everybody's job on the set, and I think he specifically writes stories that are populist in nature, which means that he relies on many different tropes, genre tropes, that are familiar. But I don't think anybody has put things together in quite the way James Cameron has. So, yeah, I'm sure he's been influenced by a lot of these things, but Avatar was an astonishing achievement, not just in 3D, but the world building. I mean, you might be telling a story that's a retelling of the Pocahontas story, or being inspired by even Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest, but that doesn't mean that if you're shooting an environment that is completely made up, they designed all of the fauna, the creatures, the animals. So much work and so much creativity by a lot of people went into those films. And I think also just because there's a superficial resemblance to these classical tales, I don't think even those other tales that you cite were the first instances of those stories. So it's interesting to look at. But then again, I'm a big James Cameron supporter and admirer. I wish I had a 20th of the talent that he has. I mean, maybe I do. I've never tried doing anything the way he has because I haven't worked my way up the way he did. So I got to give it up for Cameron. But, Ian, you do bring up very salient points that other people have brought up as well. So I'm not saying that you're wrong about that. I'm just saying that I think that it's a more nuanced question. But I could be wrong. That's just my Robservation. Hi, Rob. This comes from Man of Stan. Man of San. Not Stan. Man of San. He's been writing lately. Hi, Rob. I'd like to ask your thoughts on motion comics as an art form medium, while first giving my own. Comic books with their hand-drawn still art have long been enjoyed as a medium for bringing imaginative, stylized storytelling to life. Meanwhile, cartoon animation is so much harder and much more expensive to do while maintaining the same level of art quality and detail. Thus, making the jump from a comic book to a cartoon of similar aesthetic quality is less than commonplace. Over time, the increasing cost of cartoon animation production has led to an era of dumbed-down cartoon visuals, as seen in shows like Powerpuff Girls, South Park, My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, Thundercats Roar, etc. However, motion comics offer an aesthetically elegant intermediary state between the worlds of comic books and animated cartoons. There are various examples of fan-created motion comics on YouTube, presenting comic book stories through their panel art, enhanced by techniques such as motion panning and accompanied by audio tracks that include dialogue, background music, and sound effects. I find motion comics to be a hybrid art form capable of offering the art quality and detail we enjoy from comic books, but augmented by some of the more dynamic and immersive elements that we enjoy from cartoons without the same level of laboriousness required for full-blown hand-drawn animation. Check out the motion comics versions of the Red Hulk or World War Hulk sagas done by R.A. Mitchell on YouTube. Sometime to see some inspired examples. Well, I have to tell you, Man of Stan, I didn't know how I felt about motion comics. My first motion comics that I really remember, and I watched the whole thing, was the motion comics they did for Watchmen in support of the film, which I believe if you buy the Ultimate Watchmen box set on Blu-ray, you get those. And I have to say, I like them. And I think you're right. Like, one of my favorite animated movies of all time, and I've talked about this movie a lot, is Fantastic Planet, the Czechoslovakian-French co-production directed by René Laloux, based on Roland Topor's book. And I think so. I think it's Roland Topor's book. But they use what is called limited animation, and or quote-unquote photo cutout animation, where they would literally draw something and then make photo cutout so you could move the limbs and things like that. They would joint. Sort of, it was like 2D animation, but made with photo cutouts as opposed to individual drawings. That way, instead of having to draw everything, you literally could draw a figure, and depending on how you wanted it to look or which angle, and then you would animate that. And it was sort of a cross between animation, regular traditional 2D pencil animation or pencil and ink animation, and stop motion. And I really like that, so I was more prone to like the styles of motion comics, but I really liked them, and it's interesting because a lot of people like to listen to audiobooks, but I think if you don't want to read comics, I know people that have a hard time even reading comics. They're just not used to it, so they don't know how to do it. But I think that motion comics are a pretty interesting thing. I don't know how they would be acceptable, but to most people, but definitely interesting. This next letter comes from Just a Brown Girl, somebody who's been participating lately in the Post-Geek Singularity here, both in the live chats and sending things in. I love Just a Brown Girl, and I'm happy that she wrote me a letter. Hey, Rob, happy Thursday. She wrote this on Thursday. I guess this is from last week. I had more adventures of an indie filmmaker, ... that I wanted to share. But I thought it was far more important that I thank you. You are so incredibly gracious with us, your Post-Geek Singularity community. I was going to send this letter echoing the tribulations of being a filmmaker, how every feature film is an impossible feat, how some of us actually manage to make one anyway, and how anyone who manages to complete one is an admirable freak of nature, made of equal parts determination and creativity and vision and bravery, and such creatures in the world should be applauded, regardless of the abundance or absence of fanfare for their work. Right on, sister. I love hearing you say that. I love that you're here to illuminate that for us, because the difference between fame and success and accomplishment is a distinction that is often lost on both performers and audiences. It's an important distinction to learn. It's freeing. I love that you're proud of your work, all of your work, and you never let anyone make you feel less proud. Goddamn right. Do you realize that you give most letters their own introduction? I didn't realize that, actually. You express your excitement and set the scene like every great storyteller does. You delve in and contemplate, and you narrate. You consider, sometimes briefly, sometimes at length, and then you open your heart and your mind, and you let us in. It's such a gift to interact with someone who actually engages. Do you remember Casey Kasem? Long-distance dedications. That dude was never going to read my letter. But if you kept your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars. But you, Rob, if this letter finds you, this will be the second one of mine that you've read. It's cool and personal in a way that's rare. I used to be a John Campea Show viewer. That show fed my craving for daily showbiz news, and after about 6 months in, I stopped enjoying it. For the next 6 months, I toggled back and forth trying to quit that show. Next, I found myself fast-forwarding to the bits when you gave your take. And this year I cut the cord and rarely go back. What? Except to hear your responses to things. Oh, okay. I don't write this to throw shade. The fact of the matter is that the John Campea show is 60% Campea and 40% fan community. Robservations is 40% Robert Meyer Burnett and 60% Post-Geek Singularity. You give away 60% of your platform to us. That is, to me, community. So thank you for helping me quit Campea. Uh-oh. By the way, I will understand if you decide to skip this paragraph. I know the two of you share a large audience base, and I'm sure you guys are friends, and I'm sure he's a lovely man, but I simply am no longer a fan of his own YouTube persona. You referenced Pump Up the Volume recently, and I thought it terrifically ironic in light of the way you salivate over every Willow Yang letter. You have your own personal eat me, beat me lady. I never thought of that. What Just a Brown Girl is referring to is the Christian Slater film that was written and directed by Alan Moyle. And Christian Slater has a pirate radio station, and he read these letters from, unbeknownst to him, somebody he already knew, but he called her the Eat Me, Beat Me lady. Or maybe she called herself that. Man, now I got to watch Pump Up the Volume again. Do you remember the premise of the movie? A small community of high schoolers being systematically suffocated with expectations of conformity, yearning for a voice, yearning for someone to really hear them. In the movie, it was Happy Harry Hard-On that gave voice to the voiceless. In the Post-Geek Singularity, it's you. You are endlessly interested in everyone and every story. It bears repeating that in the cold, carnivorous world of the internets, you are indeed gracious, and the space you've created is rare. Wow. First of all, I didn't write this letter, and this is very, very nice of you to say. I very much appreciate it. Okay, this letter is way longer than I intended, so I will wrap things up with this. My friend's mom loves Picard. I don't have a horse in that race. It just makes me smile when she gushes about it, because I am thinking of you, Rob. I hope you don't yuck her yum. I hope you tell her that if she wants to love Picard, bless her heart, she should love Picard. For those freaking out over Dune, again, I have no skin in the game here. I'm not a fan and failed at reading the book twice. But I'm interested in the movie, so I've been following a guy on YouTube to catch up. The channel is called Quinn's Ideas. I think of him as your Star Trek counterpart, but on the Dune side. He takes on the casting that, while the gender swap is indisputable, the race of Liet Kynes is not canon. It's not. The Lynch movie made the character a white dude. The movie made Fremen white folks. I don't have an opinion. I'm going to wait for the movie, because, after all, execution is everything. Next, Mr. That Head. For those of you who don't know, there's a guy who writes in called That Head. He's written in sporadically. I had heard from him in a while, and he wrote in a letter that was critical of me, but I found the whole letter amusing. I can immediately think of a knife fight where a formidable woman fought a man. May I direct you to Game of Thrones? Arya Stark versus Meryn Trant, one of the most gruesome and cathartic murders I've ever seen on film or television. Want another one? Wolverine versus Lady Deathstrike. Wait, Brienne and the Hound. There's another one. Just saying, it's not about the gender, it's about the training. And I agree with that. And what happens in the later Dune books, especially with women, let's just say well, if you haven't read the Dune books, men are sort of dissuaded from fighting, whereas women are turned into an army. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, I think I'm done. So that letter was long. Apologies if some of these points have been brought up before. I'm still working full-time, so my days are not entirely mine, and I usually have to catch up on weekends. Thanks for reading this, if it gets to you. And thanks, Rob, for creating a community where lurker girls like me can hang out. I am just a brown girl. Well, let me tell you, I've wanted my whole life to have lurker girls, and it's great to have them here in the Post-Geek Singularity community. But just a brown girl, I would have to say, if I may, first of all, thank you for these very kind words, and I very much appreciate it. But with words like these, don't lurk. Jump right in. The Post-Geek Singularity needs you. They need you to be part of the community. You know, I mean, Vesna, Willow, and Paula, let me tell you, they are definitely the Three Musketeers, but they could use a D'Artagnan. You could step in and fill that role. Just saying. I don't want to speak for them either. But hey, what can you do? But what a lovely letter. Thank you very much. I want to do the whole where I'm not worthy, the Mike Myers thing. This one comes from Omar94. Omar's been like writing a letter a day. Omar, I hope you're getting some stuff done. I appreciate getting these letters all the way from the UK. I hope you're staying safe. Hi, Rob. What is your take on studios continuing film series and TV shows well past their prime, causing a decline in quality? For example, for movies... Oh, I already wrote... You know what? I read this one already. I read this yesterday, Omar. So I apologize for that. This one comes from Chris Hindley. Or Hindley, pardon me. Chris Hindley. Greetings, Rob, from your fellow entertainment carnosaur. Rawr. That's how it's written. Which is what it sounds like when you do your introduction. I would probably be the village idiot of Banterbury, which sounds like Canterbury in England. That's what it's supposed to sound like. Or perhaps the court jester. Anyway, this is my second letter, and hopefully I won't screw up the start of this letter like I did with the first one. Well, 1 out of 2 paragraphs isn't too bad so far, I guess, although I don't want to tempt fate. When there was a discussion about having sex with aliens, I couldn't stop thinking of all female... Let me read that again. When there was a discussion about having sex with aliens, I couldn't stop thinking of all the female blue race, the Asari from the Mass Effect games, and the main character, Shepard, meets, called Liara T'Soni, the xenobiologist archaeologist. I really hope if we ever do meet humanoid aliens, they look a little bit like the Asari. I don't know what it is psychologically speaking, but svelte blue humanoid women seem to be really incredibly sexy. Hubba, hubba. I guess the thought of being with someone exotic is probably a primal urge or instinct from our Neanderthal, more primitive animal age that is somehow hardwired into us, possibly related to our instinct to want to mate. Either that, or I have a bizarre kink about blue alien women. I think it's probably that. However, the recent U.S. protests that you brought up in your Robservations from those who seem to think the lockdown is some sort of a conspiracy really troubles me and makes me worry about the future of the human race. I can't believe that people would think in that way. I mean, it's obviously to stop the spread of infection. Do they not realize the whole world is staying indoors? I think what one of my Native Americans friends on Facebook said is probably true. We were not trained to live indoors for so long, and some people just can't handle being cooped up. They're scared, frustrated, angry, and just want to work again. But to think that this is all to restrict their freedom is nonsense. One person on Facebook said, "We all have to die eventually, maybe we all should." I couldn't believe what I was reading from a fellow human being. Are people really giving up? This lockdown seems to be bringing out the worst in some people, highlighting things that people in general don't usually think about, and is showing that everyone has a limit. Here in the UK, the National Health Service has had staff pleading locally and nationally with the public to stay home, to not go to the hospital unless it's really an emergency, and to let them try and deal with this pandemic. Thankfully, the majority of the public has done just that, but you always get a few who just don't get it. We've had reports of people spitting and swearing at National Health Service staff they see in the street in uniform. I saw some of that. Even a report of someone throwing a brick through a nurse's car window. I never quite understand why these people do these things. I'm guessing it may be a lack of intelligence or they're substance abusers, but thankfully these are mostly isolated cases for now. I was happy to hear that a potential treatment for COVID-19 may be ready around August, as the Oxford University team have made a breakthrough in their research and initial tests, but clinical trials on human subjects will not be started until July. There is a possibility this pandemic could last until Christmas, as the virus gets more aggressive in colder conditions, and so things could get worse. I still believe in human ingenuity, though, and that there is at least some hope for the future. The best minds are working on this. I didn't mean to ramble on about our current situation, as I know your show is usually more upbeat, but I thought I would share a little snapshot of sorts about what is happening in the British Isles, and I hope I didn't bring the mood down too much. The British way to cope with this sort of situation is to laugh in the face of adversity and to soldier on through the bad times to get to the good times. As we like to say, keep calm and carry on. Stay safe, everyone. We will get through this. Best wishes to all. Chris. P.S. This current pandemic made me think of the classic movie The Andromeda Strain, directed by Michael Crichton, the man who wrote the original novel Jurassic Park. It could be a good choice for Elizaviews whining about the movies. Well, Chris, what a delightful letter. A very nice, very thoughtful letter. It's interesting. Everybody's different depending on what you're thinking about, and I think that this whole situation has been incredibly frustrating for a lot of people. I mean, to be honest, in my case, I've sort of enjoyed it because over the last month, I literally created a couple of hours of programming. A month and a half ago, I hadn't even really started on these special features for the Hills Run Red Blu-ray, and over the last month, I created 13 pieces. It was a lot of editorial work, but I had nothing else to do other than go on YouTube and do these shows, so it was pretty fun. Like, I really enjoyed my time doing that. And I think a lot of people, I find it difficult. Like, I don't ever get bored. There's always something to read, some model to build. There's something I always want to do. There's something I want to edit. I've never been bored, I think, in my entire life. And I think that might be unique. And it's something that I know not everybody shares. But I think people could go a little stir crazy. If you don't have that impulse, there's only so much TV you can watch. As much as I love movies, if I watch movies every day for 2 weeks, I might go a little crazy. Like, I can tell you right now, I really want to get out of the house, and I want to go to Lucky Baldwin's, the Trappist, the pub down the street where I could take my dogs, and I loved sitting outside, chatting with the people that I recognize there, and I usually get the same thing. I'll have some fish and chips, and then I'll have two double Jamesons on the rocks with a beer chaser, and the dogs get their chicken breasts that they actually make for dogs at Lucky Baldwin's, and I hang out a couple hours. Elizabeth and she'll have her shepherd's pie and have some gin, and I miss that. And I think, look, a lot of people who are out of work, and I totally understand. I mean, I know people are getting crazy, and there's no reason to disrespect our healthcare workers. There's no need for that. But you're absolutely right. It just gets a little wacky. And like you said, man, I just think life's pretty good. I am in no hurry to leave, to shuffle off this mortal coil. There's so many cool things coming down the pike. That's one of the things that's kept me going. All the things that I'm interested in, all the things that make me an imagination connoisseur, that make you imagination connoisseurs. I mean, they announced a new Hunger Games movie today. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. A new Hunger Games movie was announced while we were on the John Campea show. It is a prequel, but it deals with, check it out, it deals with President Snow. And I wasn't even going to bring this up, but heck, we talked about this on the, I might as well bring it up. Maybe some of you don't know this is the case, but this was just announced. Hang on, let me pull this up here. This was just announced. Oh, did I? Oh, no, I haven't passed it yet. I know it's down here. Hold, please, as I find this story, because it's pretty exciting. I thought it was pretty cool. I mean, I really, Venom, of course, the Venom movie, Venom 2, got shuffled off its date this year and is now summer 2021. The new Venom movie is called Venom, Let There Be Carnage. What a title, man. I love that. I mean, if you're a fan of Venom, Let There Be Carnage, I'm in. But it was going to open October 2nd of this year, and now it's been pushed to June 25th, 2021, which is kind of a bummer. Chris Pine is in talks to star in Paramount's reboot of The Saint. That dropped today. And the Hunger Games prequel, it's called, check it out. And I got to say, I even like this title. The Hunger Games prequel is called The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And it's moving forward at Lionsgate with series director Francis Lawrence, who came on board with Catching Fire. And the prequel movie will focus on Coriolanus Snow at age 18, years before he would become the tyrannical president of Panem. Young Coriolanus is handsome and charming, and though the Snow family has fallen on hard times, he sees a chance for a change in his fortunes when he is chosen to be a mentor for the 10th Hunger Games, only to have his elation dashed when he is assigned to mentor the girl tribute from impoverished District 12. Now, this is going to be based on Suzanne Collins' book that has yet to come out. And one of the producers says, Suzanne Collins' book New book has been worth the wait. It offers everything fans could hope for and expect from the Hunger Games, while also breaking new ground and introducing an entirely new canvas of characters. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is creatively thrilling, and takes this world to complex new dimensions that open up amazing cinematic possibilities. We're thrilled to reunite this filmmaking team with this very unique franchise, and we can't wait to begin production. So, man, they're probably going to begin production almost as soon as the book comes out, the book comes out in May. But I have to tell you, I read the Hunger Games books, and I enjoyed them. The first Hunger Games book I really, really liked a lot. So, yeah, I'm excited. That's cool. So even during this pandemic, there's Imagination Connoisseur news dropping every day. Now I can be excited. I mean, I'm not going to get Katniss Everdeen kicking some ass, but President Snow as a young man, we can see how he became the way he became. Methinks these are going to end in tragedy. Call me crazy. This one comes back in from our friend Enterprise H, NCC 1701H. Now, this is a very inside baseball letter, but I'm going to read it anyway. Greetings, this is a follow-up letter regarding Deep Space Nine. You might have thought about this already, but the series really reminded me of the Earth-Romulan War, which we never got in Enterprise. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but it gets awfully close. You have to be a Star Trek fan to get this, but I'm going to read it. Swap Starfleet out for the United Earth Space Probe Agency. Swap Bajor out for Rigel. It's a system which is interesting enough to be stuck in. Swap the Bajorans out for the rat-like Rigelians. They seemed fairly mystical in the FASA Star Trek role-playing game. Swap the Prophets out for Quinn. One of the failed attempts at suicide creates a wormhole which allows a war between Vulcans and Romulans to occur. To be completely fair, Quinn did not exist at that point. Swap the Ferengi out for the Orions. Dabo girls for Orion slave girls. Swap the Klingons and Romulans out for the Andorians and the Tellarites. Swap the Changelings out for the Vendorians. The Romulans posing as Vulcans, sabotage stuff, and paranoia almost leads Section 31 to wipe out Vendor. Swap Section 31 out for a similar organization. It'd make a lot more sense for me for the Earth Judiciary to have created such a shadowy organization. Swap the Dominion out for the Romulan Star Empire, and swap the Breen out for the Nausicaans to set up where the weapon comes from, which the Klingons use in the animated series, and how the Nausicaans resisted Klingon conquest. Now, even though that's inside baseball, sir, all of those suggestions are dope, and I would love to have seen the Enterprise, if that series go on, if Enterprise went on, the NX-01 Enterprise to participate in the Romulan War. Admittedly, I don't know which species would occupy a planet like the Cardassians prior to the war, unless the Kzinti are an option, although I suppose that the Andorians conquered a fairly SJW species in FASA, which was described as being politically correct or breaking down emotionally when called alien. To me, when I envision a setting where starships ought to be slower, it makes a lot of sense to set a series on a starbase where the adventures come to you. Really, all of the problems that I have with DS9 go away once it becomes a prequel. You no longer have to worry about the Zach Dorn Prime Directive or the insane technologies and resources which the Federation has got at its disposal. I don't know if I agree with you on the point that DS9 is the least American. The Federation felt most like the USA there. TNG felt USA USSR Japanese, with the 1701D launching on the same day as Sputnik. Enterprise H, NCC 1701H. I love his letters because they're so inside baseball, and I love them. So, yes. Let's see. A lot of people have been writing in here. Let me go back. Let's see. Oh, Anonymous Frog sends in a tip and says, "Hey, Rob, I want to thank Bill Quall, or whatever his name is, Bill Kowal. It's nice hearing a cranky old man tell me what my childhood was, considering not all childhoods are the same. School of hard fucking knocks. Fuck." I like that. But yes, it's true. I mean, we're all trying to relate to one another here, but I agree with you. I mean, remember, everybody has a story to tell, right? But I do like Bob's letters. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat and says, "Just some channel support and an RIP to his royal badness. I play as many funky and upbeat tracks on days like these. So grateful I saw him live many times. Be well." You know what, Mukbang? You and me both. I know you have a great love for Prince. I can't help but one of my favorite Prince songs is "Sometimes It Snows in April," off Parade. But the final version. Tracy died soon after a long-fought civil war. I love that song. Sometimes it snows. Anyway, I won't sing more because I really would. I would do a whole. I won't be Questlove, but I swear I could just sing Prince songs all day, if I could. Dan V sends in a tip and said, I would disagree with your Bart Simpson hypothesis. Honestly, it just comes down to bad parenting and the rise of social media, where many parents don't discipline nowadays. They would rather be friends with a lot of entitlement, which I saw as a teacher. Dan, I totally agree with you. You know, my parents were friendly to me, but I didn't consider them like, I did not confide in my parents. I mean, I would talk to them as my parents, and my parents were very supportive and very nice. But I mean, there was definitely there was an authoritarian wall between my parents and I. And in a way, I kind of respected that. But I think you're absolutely right. I think this idea, look, you know, a lot of it I think has to do with our arrested adolescence. Like, having one of the great regrets in my life is that I didn't have children of my own, which I never even thought about when I got married. I thought, well, of course I'm going to have children. I love kids. But I don't know if I would have been a great parent, because I would have been the epitome. I would have been the poster child for being friends with your kids. I mean, maybe I would have been a disciplinarian, but I have a hard time with that. I don't know. I don't know if I would have been a good parent. Maybe my kids dodged a bullet. Maybe I dodged a bullet. I don't know. But I love all kids now, and now I can be a kid at heart for the rest of my life. And of course, Elizabeth has two teenage daughters, so I certainly get a taste on a daily basis of what it's like to be a parent, and I like it. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, I was reminded of the 80s B-movie Hard Ticket to Hawaii today. The unmotivated topless women and gratuitous sex, combined with razor frisbees and the bazookaing of blow-up dolls, had way too low levels of verisimilitude. It had a big impact on my preteen mind. Is that Andy Sedaris? Something like that? Bob Koal says, recommending Chuck Norris versus Communism, a documentary about how black market American VHS tapes, with translations dubbed at great risk by one woman, helped spark the Romanian democratic revolution in the 80s. Free on Prime. That is awesome. That's a real documentary? I love that. Chuck Norris versus Communism. It was like the letter that was written in about going to see Return of the Jedi in a Central American country at Great Life and Limb. That was a couple days back. One of my favorite letters we've ever had on this show. Dan V sends in another tip and says, I will say with another topic that Marvel's decision as a company to not donate money to comic book stores and to just wait for Diamond to reopen is baffling. DC is trying to help with other distributors and has donated money. I don't get it at all. Dan, I don't either. I mean, the comic book industry right now, it's not like Spindle Racks and Walmart are saving the comic book industry. We desperately need comic book stores to survive. We absolutely do. And I really hope that, I really hope. Claudius sends in another tip and says, this is a 5 out of 6, his thoughts. Thumbs up to Just a Brown Girl's letter. Now back to The Simpsons. In my humble opinion, The Simpsons critically thinking, it values judgment and knowledge. Bart may be funny, but he wasn't designed as a role model. He just became one. That's very true. Bart is like La Dolce Vita's Marcello. He's living his best life in tragedy masked like a comedy. That is also Jep from La Grande Bellezza. The chances of a healthy end to any of these characters is less than zero. Reference intended. Man, I love you, Claude. You and I definitely park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. I'm also a big fan of Bret Easton Ellis, which, how can you not be, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to bring an end to this episode of Robservations, episode number 397. The 400th episode is coming up on Friday. I am going to be on for 400 minutes. And for those of you who might be asking, I'm going to do it the way John Campea did his show. It's going to be an all-charity show. I'm going to, all super chats and tips that are generated in that are going to go to charity. And I've been looking into the different charities that are available. I've been going to Charity Watch, and I think definitely one of the charities that I want to donate to is Gary Sinise's charity. He has an almost 100% approval rating, and his charity goes to first responders and our military in a variety of ways. And that's just one of the many charities. I don't know if I'm going to do them every hour or what, but I'm going to do charities that are all based in and around helping people during this time of COVID-19, but also that move beyond that. And if you look up Gary Sinise's charity, it's pretty amazing. So I'm going to do that on Friday. So the entire 400 minutes or maybe longer of the show, I will be raising money for charity, just so you know, both via super chats and tips. So that's going to be fun. I thought John did a tremendous job doing that, and I thought it would be something that I would like to do as well. Now, the 400th episode that airs Friday is going to also have pre-recorded segments. So far, I have recorded 2 long pre-recorded segments that I'm going to show previews of, and then I will release the interviews, the full interviews on the show individually, and I'm still working on getting a few more interviews. Some people couldn't do it, but I'm getting a few more interviews that you'll be excited to see. So it's going to be a bang-up show Friday. It will be starting at noon. That's right. Robservations episode 400 begins at noon. And since I have pre-recorded segments to play, we'll see how far I can go. I'm going to go for at least 400 minutes, and I'm going to be doing the whole show to raise money for charity. So there you go. Now, this episode of Robservations, episode number 397, I'm bringing it to an end, but obviously I want to thank my moderating staff, beginning with Mayor Mike Bodden, who I know isn't here much, but he does make sure I get letters. I want to thank, of course, Detective Jim Boyers and his wife Heidi. She's out there too, don't forget. Of course, Greg Smith and Louis Yu and Jordy Lyons, who make the Post-Geek Singularity live chat everything it can be, because when you've got people, come on, let's face it, when you got Paula, Vesta, and Willow in those chats, it can degenerate and get X-rated really, really fast. If it wasn't for my moderating staff, I mean, who knows? I might have to move this show over to Pornhub or something. Anyway, remember, everybody, I love all of you for sending in letters and supporting the channel in every way, shape, or form, and every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everyone, as I always do, have a better day.